Dan Orlovsky joins us now. It's remarkable the names that have been tweeting within the last hour on this very same subject. And Dan, just to give you an idea, Watt, Mahomes, Breeze, Michael Thomas, Carson Wentz, Todd Gurley, Richard Sherman, Darius Slade, Jarvis Landry, Russell Wilson, Stephon Diggs, Jared Goff, Byron Jones. That's just to name some of them. There are many, many more. What's your reaction to this coordinated stance by some of the NFL's biggest names?
Yeah, I'd say first off, tremendous leadership by those superstars because they know that the weight of the words or their words has impact. And they're speaking up for the 53rd person on the roster that, you know, a lot of organizations or owners that person may say the same thing as a J.J. Watt, but it's not going to carry the same type of impact. So great leadership. I'd say this, the players want the NFL to be proactive rather than reactive. You know, like they want to know what is going to happen if this is the case or that's the case. A lot of players are so routine-based. Well, their routines are going to be tragically or very different than they have been in the past. So they need to know that information and what's it going to look like for them. And I think the biggest thing is everybody knows this is going to be the most taxing season for the players in their careers, but it's also going to tax their families more than they have ever been as well. And so we don't know good enough for the players. The we don't know answer from the NFL will not be good enough. And that's what we're seeing right now is the players standing up and saying, we need concrete answers before we move forward.
In some ways, Dan, it's evocative of the players really pushing the conversation on social justice after the killing of George Floyd, and the players taking it upon themselves to make that very powerful video of which some of the biggest names again in the game, and then really forcing Roger Goodell to answer that and address the subject of racism straight on as a response to that video. It feels like we're in an era, Dan, and I don't know what your observation is as a former player, where their voices are being used to great effect.
They just have learned how powerful they are. They know that they're the product, right? The NFL is an amazing league, and the shield on the jersey, we have all said no one is bigger than the shield. But I think what we're seeing is players realizing that the 1,500 plus of them, if they do stand together, they are the shield. And people, the fans, watch the games for the players, not for the three letters of the NFL. And so, you know, everyone knows that if the players stand together and the NFL stands with the players, then it's an incredibly powerful group. And I'll go back to this. The players are going to be asked a lot this year. And, yes, they are going to be paid a ton of money, and they aren't – you know, there's a lot of people that are dealing with a ton of real-world issues. But what I think we're going to see this year is the players realizing that a lot of those real-world issues are going to come and be a part of their home this year. There's going to be mothers that are taxed more than wives that are taxed more than ever. And the players are realizing that and going, all right, if I'm going to subject myself to this and then subject my family members to this, then I have to make sure that my employer is doing everything. And I need to know these answers. I need to know that before I step into the arena that my employer is doing everything to make sure that I'm safe, my wife is safe, my children are safe, their grandparents are safe, before I ever agree to go, all right, the next 5 months, I'm going to saddle up and go do my job.
I mean, we look at this relationship between the NFLPA and the NFL, and they managed to come together to achieve labor peace for the next decade. And yet everybody knew this was coming. The schedule has been on schedule. Football has not moved its schedule. These rookies are supposed to report tomorrow for these two teams, and we have these huge names standing up for the rookies. But how could the league and the union not come together? What is this dynamic at play with something that's so obvious that needs to be put into place?
Yeah, that's the thing that is somewhat alarming to me is how do we get here? This hasn't been a surprise. This has been since really March, right? And so there should have been multiple conversations and multiple plans of how things were going to be handled. And I'll go back to the reactive versus proactive. The players want the NFL to be proactive with this and have multiple plans to how they're going to handle things, to give them some form of comfort, to give their family members some form of comfort. They've got a short amount of time to get this all figured out. They need to learn from some of the other pro sports leagues that have already started. And I'd say like the biggest difference is, this isn't the NBA in the bubble. There is no bubble. This is 32 different cities, and their families are going to be every part of their everyday life. And so, the big thing for the NFL that they need to prove to the players right now, if I'm a player that is in the NFL, I want to know, what are you going to do in November if something happens? What is my testing going to be like? Okay, I'm a guy that gets to the facility at 6 o'clock every Monday morning. Can I still do that? What happens if 40 guys show up at Tuesday at 10 o'clock and we have to get tested at the same time? What's my time frame like? Can I stay after and do my test? When do I get tested on a Friday? I think those are all those intense questions that need to get answered by the NFL. If I test positive, is the NFL going to quarantine me from my teammates and my family? What do I have to – are you going to pay for me to quarantine away from my family? There's so many questions that need to be answered before these players can feel comfortable, and that's the burden that the NFL now has to bear really in the next 72 hours before players can feel comfortable with moving ahead with starting training camp.